Kom från Sydosvedjen, kom de och sjua. Sydosvedjen, lass mig vidare. Kom från Sydosvedjen, kom de och här. Sydosvedjen, lass mig med. Lär och dansen.
Good evening, ladies and gentlemen. Good evening. So here I am on a Saturday night to talk about the death of Rayshard Brooks here in Atlanta. Episode number 5. Let's get into the show. All right, so we find ourselves today facing another police shooting. This police shooting happens in the capital city of Georgia, the city that I grew up in. This literally happened down the street from the church I was raised in. So for all of you guys that are listening that may not be familiar with the story, I'm going to give you an outline of the story, and then we're going to talk about it. So we have a gentleman by the name of Rayshard Brooks, 27 years old, was in a Wendy's parking lot. He was asleep in his car. Police officers was called out because he was asleep in the car. So I guess people were concerned. They wasn't sure if he was okay. So they contacted the police department. The police department comes out, and immediately they approach the car. Rayshard wakes up. He talks with the police officers. He gives them his license. He complies. And then somewhere things go wrong. The attorneys for Mr. Brooks stated that the witnesses account that he was cooperating with the authorities. Things were going well. And then all of a sudden, the police officer tried to detain him, tried to put him in custody. Mr. Brooks then, I'm assuming, no one really knows, but I'm sure there was some conversation about, well, why am I being detained? So then there's a struggle that ensued. He resists arrest. He somehow gets the taser from one of the officers and then starts to run away from the police officers. At the time of him running away from the police officers, he points a taser over his shoulder towards them as he's running away. As he's pointing the taser, essentially one of the officers that was close by pulls his weapon out and discharges his weapon while Mr. Brooks is running away from the police officers. And they shoot. I'm not sure exactly how many shots, but they shoot Mr. Brooks immediately. He falls to the ground. There was about 2 minutes and some odd seconds where they did not render any aid to Mr. Brooks. He laid on the ground, and the police officers began to comb the scene and remove shell casings to, I'm assuming, hide how many shots was actually discharged towards Mr. Brooks. So that is the story that we know of right now today as it relates to Mr. Brooks. But let's break this down a little bit. So we have 2 white police officers responding to a concern call. I mean, this was a concern call of someone asleep in the car. And we don't know and this is the thing, people don't know if he was asleep. They didn't know if he had a medical issue, anything, right? So you call the police and say, hey, somebody's in the car and, they may need help. But how does that turn into him being killed? So when I looked at the video over and over again, I'm seeing two police officers hell-bent on the idea of you're going to comply by any means necessary. And so basically, one of them did what they felt would be the best thing to do, which is to discharge their weapon, which is absolutely crazy to me. The gentleman's car is at the freaking Wendy's, right? So if he's running away, it's not like where can he go? This is what his attorneys posed today on the news conference. And it makes sense. Why discharge your weapon if he's running away from you and you are the police and you have his car? You've identified him. He's giving you his identification. You've identified him. You know who he is. You've called in on dispatch. The car is right there. So if he is running away, then you do your police work, right? You would then go to his house, put a warrant out, bring him in. He fled justice. He obstructed justice. He ran from the scene. You handle it that way. But to discharge your weapon, that makes no sense. In Atlanta, y'all, I did an episode, I think probably episode 2 or 3, where we was talking about George Floyd, and I was just talking about, the rioting and looting in the city of Atlanta, and how, this was a predominantly African-American city, which it is. But living in Atlanta, I've never had a problem with APD. To me, APD was, a basic department that to me wasn't as vicious as other places in Georgia. So to see this happen in Atlanta, it definitely gets you to start to think, man, there may be a higher power at this thing. This has to be some kind of conspiracy beyond just a road cop. I mean, because it in all places in Atlanta. But then we see after that the police chief resign. And here's my take on her. I think she ought to resign because apparently she's ineffective for the city of Atlanta. She's ineffective for the highest position at the police department. She cannot control her police officers. She cannot. So I commend you, Erica Shields, for resigning, for saying that, hey, I can no longer do this job. Now, for the reasons we may not ever really know, does she agree with some of the actions of her police officers? What strikes me the most about Erica Shields is that when the two college students, the one from Morehouse and one from Spelman, actually was detained and criminal charges were filed against them, she came out and she said she came out and said that the charges were political, which to me insinuates that she does not necessarily see anything wrong with the actions that they took. She said that they were overzealous and she agreed that they needed to be removed from the police department, but she, for some reason, could not get behind the fact that they had broke a law. So you're right. I think that this police chief needs to go. I think she needs to go. Mayor Keisha Lance Bottom announced on Saturday that the city's police chief had resigned and called for immediate termination of the officer who shot the man. The authority said the man, Rayshard, like we were talking about, Brooks, ran from the police officer. He got the taser. But again, like I said, the taser is not a deadly weapon. The taser is not a gun, and he was running away from the authorities. So I just wanted to jump on here real quick and make a quick episode about this and make sure that my voice is heard in this matter. And I think that it is absolutely pitiful that we are seeing this happen in this city of Atlanta. And I hope that whoever replaces Erica Shields understands the climate and the nature of where we are, and that they can effect change, because that's what we need. We don't need anyone in authority to not understand the wrongdoings and not understand the course of action, or the course of action that needs to happen, right? There has to be a change. There has to be something new to come about. But the attorneys for Mr. Rayshard Brooks basically said, hey, man, I feel defeated. I feel defeated right now because I don't feel like anything is going to change. He talked about it. He compared it to Walter Scott and how Walter Scott was running away from the authorities and they shot and killed him. The same exact thing happened in this case with Rayshard Brooks. So my message to all my brothers and sisters that are listening to this podcast today is if you come in contact with the police officer right now, do your best to comply with every single command. It right now where we are, it makes no sense that we have to advocate that over obedience is the way that we have to roll right now because of the climate. But I mean, we're seeing people shot and killed, you know, running from the police officer. You, like I said, you know who the person is. You wasn't responding to a murder. You wasn't responding to a bank robbery. You weren't responding to any of that. You were responding to a concerned citizen's call that someone was asleep in their car. And then they tried to make up the whole field sobriety. So the attorney disputed the fact that there was no field sobriety that was done. They said that it was a conversation. There was a conversation. And all of a sudden, this police officer said, "You're going to jail." So imagine that. You minding your business, you sleep in your car, whether or not you're under the influence. The car wasn't in motion. The car wasn't in motion. You sitting there, you sleep. All of a sudden, someone knocks on your window and it's the police officer in the climate that we're in now. And so he's like, well, you know, what did I do? All of a sudden say you're going to jail for sleeping in your car. For sleeping in your car. Legally parked too, by the way. The authorities, you know, they tried to come out with this story. And that's why you got to always, you know, you got to wait for all the information to come about. You got to look at the surveillance cameras. You got to look at all these things. Because the line was filled with people at the drive-thru. The police officers, the car that Mr. Brooks was driving was actually parked in the parking space. But they said that he was in the drive-thru line. So, I mean, this is the little stuff that you got to understand, and you got to wait for those details to come out. The attorney stated that he was not blocking the drive-thru. He was simply sitting in his car, sleep. So I you know, every single time, like when you hear a story about a person killed, and I don't care what color they are, really, truly, I don't care what color they are. But what we're seeing more often than not, and the stories that we're hearing more often than not, are from Africa or about African American people. But I don't care if this man was Hispanic, Black, Asian. It does not make it right to walk up to someone's car and then all of a sudden, for whatever reason, and this is it's not clear either. The reasons for Mr. Brooks being killed or the reason for his detainment or attempted detainment is unclear. There was no field sobriety test done. He wasn't driving the car. The car was parked. Then all of a sudden, now he's going to jail. So, ladies and gentlemen, boys and girls, understand the climate that we're in. If you don't take away anything from this podcast, please take away the fact that if you come in contact with police officers right now, comply. And I'm not saying that Mr. Brooks, by him, you can clearly see that Mr. Brooks was running away from the police officer. Okay. And it's not right to run away from the police officer. I'm not advocating that. I'm not overlooking that. I don't want you to think that this is a one-sided conversation. We do have to look at that, and we have to take that into account. That's true. He was running away from the police. Maybe if he didn't run away from the police, maybe he would be here today. But it still does not justify the fact that you kill someone as they're running away for a non-violent crime. And even if it was violent, you don't just shoot someone like we're in the Wild Wild West. They run away. Typically, you get in your squad car. Like you get in your car and you go and follow. He's running. Your car is right there. You know what I mean? Like, who are we employing as police officers right now? That's what we're talking about, defunding the police. We're talking about all of these other things that we need to try to do to somehow affect the change. But I think we need to just get all of the scary ass cops off the force. If you're afraid of human beings, whether I don't care what color they are, if you are afraid of other people, you do not need to be a police officer. Period. You don't need to be a police officer because it doesn't make sense. For every single time there is a situation, you have to grab your gun. So to me, this is a 100% unjustified murder. Now what we're going to see is riots in the city of Atlanta. We're going to see the city of Atlanta go through more and more and more trauma. I mean, imagine that. Like what type of cop right now and this time would discharge their weapon unless they were absolutely right now? Any cop should only be should only be discharging their weapon under grave danger right now. I mean, if any other time you act like you got some damn sense as a cop, it's like now. But here's the thing. If you have that in your heart, if you're evil, wicked person, you don't have that rationale because you don't give a damn. I mean, that's just real talk. You know. So that's my take on it. I think that the shooting and the death of Rayshard Brooks is absolutely 100%, 1000%. Those cops need to go to jail. Or that one cop who pulled the trigger need to go to jail for sure. The other one, I mean, the evidence hasn't come out yet. But here's what we do know: both of them, one of them rendered aid for over 2 minutes. That could have eventually got him, some type of assistance. It could have saved his life. So they have to be accountable for that as well. So we'll see how this story plays out. I hope that it plays out in a positive. I also heard his cousin on at a press conference that they did, and his cousin was just tore up, man. And one of the things his cousin said is, I never thought that I would be here. Being behind the computer or being behind the screen is one thing, but actually being on the other side, it's another. So my prayers go out to the Brooks family because this is a trying time for them. His daughter just had a birthday today. And, and it's almost like every time we hear about, like one of these murders, man, it's like days later, somebody's birthday that was close to them or something. And it just puts you in, or their birthday. And it's almost like, well, how can this still happen right now in this climate? How can you kill somebody as a police officer unless your life was just in grave danger? Like there was a shootout. We never hear about the shootouts. You know what I mean? Like we don't hear shootouts anymore. Like where cops are getting shot at and they firing back. The cops are the damn shootout now. Well, ladies and gentlemen, that's all I got for y'all for this episode number 5. Please keep the Brooks family in your prayers. And Chief Shields, thank you for resigning, and thank you for moving the hell out the way so that we can get a chief that can actually do the job. Thank y'all for listening to me here at Real Talk. New Wave here, I can't even do my outro. New Wave Real Talk. I am your host, Raymond, and it's a pleasure with me hanging out with you guys here for episode number 5. But ladies and gentlemen, let's just do our best to comply with every command of these police officers. Whether you are in the right or not, comply. I do not want to see anyone else, which like the attorney said for Mr. Brooks, he won't be the last. And that's unfortunate. But if you come in contact with police officers, comply, 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 and stay alive. That's all I got for y'all on episode 5. I'll see y'all on the next one.
Kom så skjul og svetjen, kom dam og skjue. Skjul og svetjen, la seg videre. Kom så skjul og svetjen.